We will call our representatives from Atlas and DOTD to the table to give the updated report. And for the record, always introduce yourself so that we have that. You gonna do this solo?
I am flying solo
Okay.
today. But the secretary's here, as well as Dr. Calavuta behind me. So,
Then go ahead, Kara, introduce yourself and proceed. Thank you.
okay. My name is Kara Maury. I work for Atlas Technical Consultants, and we are the prime consultant for the Mississippi River Bridge project. As always, we start off with introducing our project team. This is kind of everybody we have on this part one of our project. Obviously, the ultimate objective of this project is to construct a new crossing of the Mississippi River in the greater Baton Rouge area. We have two parts to our contract. We are at the tail end of part one, which is called Enhanced Planning Study. We began in July of 2020, and we will be wrapping up in summertime of this year. And the goal of the end of that contract is that we go straight into part two, which is the environmental evaluation, or the NEPA document that will be performed to identify a preferred alternative. Our study area has not changed. It starts in Baton Rouge at the I-10 Horace Wilkinson Bridge and extends all the way down to the Sunshine Bridge past Donaldsonville. And on the West Bank, our limits are we're going to connect somewhere on LA1 and over on the East Bank to LA30. So it's roughly, I don't know if I said this already, but roughly 62 river miles of a very, very large study area. This is our project workflow, and this workflow has not changed since we started kind of giving you this presentation last year. And walking through it, basically we are rounding up on gearing up for our public meetings that are set for the end of April, early May. So basically what you'll see from last time when we met in December, the yellow in progress boxes at the bottom, that's kind of what's been our focus the last 3 months, and we'll talk about that in detail. So walking you through the beginning for those that are just tuning in, basically this has been our approach to this part of the contract. We started with a pre-screening where we identified plausible and reasonable alternatives, and we basically started out with 32. We were able to put those 32 through a round one screening. We avoided things like highly sensitive resources. We incorporated some travel demand traffic information and incorporated some technical bridge design considerations as well through that first part of the screening. And from there, we were able to narrow down those 32 to 20 alternatives. And that's basically where we were the last time we met in December. After that particular meeting, this is where it gets interesting. We had a series of stakeholder meetings with the river pilots, the Corps of Engineers, any and all navigation users, levee districts, you name it, we talked to those guys. And we did do a navigation study in the beginning of the process, but what was different this time is that we actually had alignments to show those river pilots. And we had they were very honest with their feedback. It was very realistic, good conversation, informative. It was actually educational for me, where they actually, we walked them through each alignment and where it was crossing the river, and they were even throwing out hypothetical scenarios, talking to each other, saying, some of them, we showed them 20, and some of them they were like, absolutely not. And then other ones they were like, maybe we can work with this if you move some things around. So we did that. We moved some things around on some of the alignments. But ultimately, at the end of those series of stakeholder meetings, we decided that navigation was basically a showstopper, because at the end of the day, if those river pilots can't navigate safely, ultimately we would not get a permit to build the bridge. So we thought that was prudent enough for us to be able to eliminate 10 of those 20 alternatives. So that's where we are today. We have 10 alternatives that we're going to bring to the public in April, early May. And as soon as we are done with those public meetings, we'll be compiling all the comments, and we will be narrowing them down to that handful of feasible alternatives. So this is just showing what we went to the river pilots with and basically what they came up with. These were the 20 alternatives, and it kind of gives you a visual of what those span layouts could look like. And out of those 20, these are the 10, the red are the ones that were eliminated, and we'll just be focusing on the 10 that have proceeded towards our round 2 screening today. So walking you through, let's see, I think the mouse works. So this map shows, I split it by parish this time, and this only shows the 20 and then the 10 that are proceeding forward. So, focusing on the northern part of our study area, this is showing you that basically most of the northern alternatives were eliminated due to the navigation impacts. This C alternative is the alternative that starts in West Baton Rouge Parish. It comes in right north of where Dow is located along LA1. I think this is Sid Richardson Road right here where it starts. And so C52 and C63 are the 2 that remain. So there are actually 2 that come in on the East Baton Rouge Parish side of LA30. This number 2 right here, it ties into LA30 where Innovation Park Drive is, which is the old GSRI Avenue. You can see this little facility right here is the LSU Fire Training FETI facility, and here's Innovation Park Drive right here. And then C63 is actually where LA30 ties into Bluebonnet. Here's Bluebonnet right here. It kind of loops around and goes back towards I-10. Here's LaBerge Casino in the middle of the C52 and the C63, just to give you a point of reference. So out of all of these, only 2 out of this particular page made it in from the original 20 alternatives. Let's see. Oh, I skipped one. So this particular map focuses on Iberville Parish. So there are 7 out of the 10 remaining alternatives are located solely in Iberville Parish on both banks of the river. This alternative E, let's see. Up here towards the north right here near Plaquemine is where the ferry currently is, just to give you a reference point. And then coming down to E, this is Evergreen Road, comes up right along here next to Georgia Gulf, and here's the Shintech facility. Alternative F, there's a firing range right to the north of where this facility comes in as well. Moving on down, staying on the west bank of the river, we have alternative H, which comes in at LA1 at 24th Street. I and J were eliminated due to navigation constraints, and then you have K22 and K23 that are moving forward. So this K alignment, here's the Clean Harbors facility, just to give everybody an idea of where we're tying in right here. I think this is the Cora, Texas industrial facility on this side, and then switching over to the east side of the river, starting up near the East Baton Rouge Parish line, Iberville Parish line, you have U Club right here, and the first alternative coming in is into the city of St. Gabriel. There's an Anytime Fitness little strip mall right here, and then that's where alternative E and F kind of end up on alternative 4 right here. You have St. Gabriel City Hall is right here, and you have Bayou Paul Road. Coming on down to alternative 5. Let's see. We have the St. Gabriel. It ties in right before the St. Gabriel Fire Department. And then this is the old Willow Glen Entergy Station. So moving on further down, I think we're still in the St. Gabriel city limits. LA30 kind of turns right here, and number 7, Olmsted Industrial it's right past Olmsted Industrial on LA30, right before you get to the Ascension Parish line. And in here, you have Syngenta right in here. Geigy Access Road is kind of right here on LA30. So again, we have 7 alternatives in Iberville. And lastly, moving on into Ascension towards the south, we have 1 alternative that made it through, and again, it lies on both banks of the river in Ascension Parish. So it's alternative M. And basically where this one ties into LA30, there's a little road called Frank Noel Road. It kind of crosses over this alternative right here. And then on this side of the river, the Roman numerals IX is basically right before you get to Methanex in Ascension Parish on LA30. There's a Scott's Equipment, and then you have Westlake on the other side of This is LA 75, I believe, which is kind of right past it. And then alternative N, which was our southernmost alternative, did get eliminated out of this round due to navigation concerns. So, oh, I think I skipped a slide. Okay. So basically, the biggest question that we get asked throughout this whole study is what's taking so long? What have you been doing? Well, this is what we've been doing. We've been working on this table to get these 10 alternatives, to get the data that we need to be able to do our due diligence to be able to screen these alternatives out. And I've been trying to rack my brain with how to make it personal to people so they understand how much goes into this. And the best analogy I could come up with was basically, would everyone agree that, buying a home is probably a person's biggest investment that they make in their lifetime? Would anybody buy a home without asking any sort of question whatsoever? The answer is probably no. Would you check your flood zone? Would you check, what school zone your kids might go to? Would you check, how long will it take you to get to work? That's a big, question I might ask. Same kind of applies here. The state's going to be making a very large investment in this new bridge, and they're trying to make sure that they're doing their due diligence, asking all the right questions to be able to make sure we put it in the best spot possible. This is what we decided on for our round 2 evaluation factors. And I have a table that basically lines this out for you. But we focused mainly on, this is the biggest changes that we've had since December in our round 1 screening. We actually have toll numbers, toll value, average daily traffic numbers. We actually have toll revenue estimates and actually preliminary construction cost estimates. We also focused on environmental impacts, real life bridge impacts and constructability issues, as well as property impacts such as structures and right of way. So this is what we've been doing. I said all of that to say this is basically what we've been doing and trying to get the important data that we need to be able to screen these alternatives out. It's if you just look at the table, it's a little overwhelming, but each one of it I can do the best to kind of walk you all through all of our factors that we have today. Starting these alternatives, these are the 10 that are going through to the public, and they go from north to south on the table. In this first column right here, we have the mileage. They don't differ too much in actual length of alternative, just about a 2-mile difference between each one. This is a big difference that we have now. We actually have these average daily traffic with toll factored in on how much we expect. And this is the table that we will be taking to the public. We actually have a backup table that has the numbers filled in here. So each one of these actually has values and numbers, and we kind of identify in our table notes down here that are very, very easy to see, right, up on the screen. But, as you are in the most northern alternative, the C52, which is the one that starts right north of Dow and ends at Innovation Park Drive. This particular one, it's showing a lower average daily traffic, and that's because its proximity to the I-10 bridge. It's competing basically with that bridge. So people would have to make a decision whether or not they stay on the I-10 bridge or they go and pay a toll and travel the new bridge. So it's still close enough to where it's not pulling as much volume there. But as you go a little further south, we have some better average daily traffic numbers on the new bridge. And then these two, H19 and K22, they're kind of in the middle of the whole project study area. So, it's a little bit more out of the way. So they're a little bit low. That's the reason why these are, red is the least amount of benefit. And green, obviously, the best benefit on this color chart for the whole table. This is our next column here is change in area-wide total vehicle hours in our design year of 2042. So this is in vehicle hours travel. So this is on the whole network. How's it doing reducing your hours of delay or travel and delay on the whole network? So as you can see, the ones closest to the I-10 bridge do a little bit better. And as you move further south, they start to turn red. And the reason for this here in the south is these are closer to the Sunshine Bridge, right? So, you're actually adding more people into the network, so it's actually increasing your level of delay down here as you get further away from the I-10 bridge. And that goes we actually have an I-10 column in here to measure as well. So kind of the same scenario for the whole network as well as on I-10 differences. We definitely looked at property impacts, and for now we have just a large buffer area that we use for each of those alternatives. Obviously, as we get into the NEPA document and we have those three, we'll refine that buffer area back and then reevaluate all these numbers. But we considered residential, business, public, industrial, and O stands for other. So that can mean any kind of structures like agricultural structures, barns, garages, things of that nature that didn't fall into our other categories. We have pipelines, power lines, bridge constructability issues, and we're actually ranking these alternatives against each other. So if you see a little bit of red here in the middle, it doesn't necessarily mean that the bridge couldn't be built. It just means that this one may have a more complex span arrangement. It could have more piers in the water. It could be harder for them to get materials down there to actually construct, things of that nature. And then, obviously, if it's harder to construct or more complex, that could mean higher cost and, more time to actually build the bridge. So a big item of interest on here, we actually have preliminary estimated cost to construct. And we originally had this in 2022 dollars, but we decided to inflate it with a certain percentage up to 2030, which would represent, more of what it would be at that time to actually build the bridge. The prices range, the lowest one being 1.293 billion, which is the southernmost alternative, and the highest ranging at 1.9. And then, a newer value we have on here is actual estimated toll revenue over 50 years. So this is showing you right here that, just tolls is not going to do it for this bridge. That it's representing what we would, essentially expect the bonding capacity to be over a 50-year value. And then we had some environmental and social impacts listed on here. And again, these wetland impacts, as we refine it, those numbers would look better over time because we could refine and avoid some things. Let's see. Just explaining these green values kind of down here in the south when it comes to cost. There's kind of two reasons for this. These two in particular have a more direct connection on the east bank of the river where LA 30 ties in to I-10. So, those numbers are looking a little bit better there. And as well, a second, especially when it comes to the toll value being so high down here in the south, they actually have a larger percentage of truck traffic, down in the Ascension area with all the industry down there. And so those guys collect a way higher toll, than a regular passenger car vehicle. So that's another reason why the toll values are pretty high down here. Any questions on the table itself? So this map is just a clean version map of the 10 that are going to the public. This particular kind of looking map is what you'll see. We're going to have like an online polling mechanism that we're going to roll out in conjunction with the public meetings, and it'll look like a platform kind of similar to this. So next step, what we've been doing thus far, the past 3 weeks, basically, have gone to each of the parish presidents. I did reach out to Livingston, haven't heard back yet, but I met with each of you. I did Ascension this morning, actually, with Mr. Diaz and Parish President Kotma. And I walked them through our backup table that I mentioned earlier. So, I spent a lot of time, briefing each of the parishes, walking them through. We met with the city of St. Gabriel and his administration. We even had a conference call with Congressman Garrett Graves about 2 weeks ago. And then throughout the process, I think we met with the crisis group maybe twice. East Iberville Community Advisory Panel, the Baton Rouge Area Chamber, and then more recently we met with the leaders of Gabria and the Louisiana Motor Transport Association. So those guys are going to become, as we narrow this down, we're going to have probably another series of stakeholder meetings with industry as well as the Trucking Association. So next steps, this is our public meeting schedule. We'll have open house format. There'll be 6 in-person meetings. So they're basically from Monday, April 25th through April 28th, that Thursday, and then Monday, May 2nd to May 3rd. And you don't have to, scramble to write these down. We have some handouts and flyers. We'll have everything posted on our website. Let's see. And we would like to invite each of you to, if you're able to come to the ones in your parish, come and show your support and spread the word. I know we talked to maybe Iberville about putting it on their water bill, just blasting it on your social media any way you can and get the word out. Encourage people to come. So along with the in-person meetings, I mentioned that online engagement component. We'll have a map-based virtual mechanism. We'll be illustrating the alignment alternatives. It's pretty interactive, so you can click and tell us what you like about some, don't like, tell us about important things that you know about near the area, things that we may not be able to find on a mapping database. Again, here's our project website. So all of the information that we've done basically goes on this website. You can also submit comments on the website itself. This slide is something that we show to the committee each time. Basically, we've had about 86% time lapse, and our, with our schedule, we're right along the same lines as work completed. So the biggest takeaway from today is we have 10 alternatives today. And yes, we could absolutely narrow them down to 3. You guys saw the data. We have the table filled out. We could do it today if we needed to. But in order for us to be able to roll this into our NEPA document, we have to go out to the public first and get their input, as well as your input from each of the parishes. So that's our next step. So, we're going to get feedback on those 10 alternatives at the end of April, early May. Our comments are set to be due about 10 mailing days after the finalize of the public meetings. We'll compile everything, and then we'll actually sit down and have the exercise where we weed the 10 down to 3. That'll happen at the end of May. So biggest takeaway from today, we have 10. We'll be down to 3 by the end of May, early June. And then, as I mentioned before, we'll be going straight into that NEPA evaluation. And the reason we've done things the way we have and been so careful with getting all this data is that so it can absolutely be rolled into our NEPA document pretty seamlessly. Everything we've done so far has been pretty NEPA compliant, and we hope to, our worst fear for any project is you don't want to backtrack or get to the end and you find out something that you didn't know before and you have to redo something. That's absolutely, we want to avoid that, and that's why we've done things the way we have up until this point. So we'll be, kicking off our Part 2 NEPA document in summer of this year. Let's see. Did I miss anything? So as recently as last night, I read a headline and it said, plans are at a standstill. Well, I don't know what plans they're referring to, because it's not my plans. It's not this project at all. We're clearly showing you we are rolling with getting this data, getting these alternatives narrowed down. Where we could come to a standstill would be if we get to the end of our NEPA document and we do not have a funding plan. That could prevent us from getting a signed, clear document on our preferred alternative, and that would absolutely put us at a standstill. So, identifying the funding, having the funding in place is very important for us to have that plan, and we're doing our thing. We'll be down to 3 by early summer, which is in a month and a half from now, and we'll roll right into refining those alternatives, doing the actual boots on the ground studies where we do wetland delineations, we do real right-of-way impacts, and we're going to narrow that down to one preferred location. So that's the goal of our entire study. It's happening, folks. Another thing I get asked is, there has been so many other studies. Well, none of those studies had a particular goal or particular agenda for just the new river crossing. There was the Loop study. There were several others, and we built upon those. But this is the first one that's literally geared just for a new river bridge crossing. So, it's once we get to that preferred alternative, the key is having that funding, getting our signed environmental document, and we'll be good to go.
So that if anybody has any questions, President Berthelot.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Kara, you're talking about the end of May. I talked to some of my legislators about this, and you also mentioned funding, and we have a lot of money at risk. Thankful the governor has included some of this in his budget. But session ends, I think, May 15th, and if we don't have anything by then, I think we're gonna have a hard time pulling off keeping this money. So instead of the end of May, is it possible we could move this thing up?
So they technically, kind of by law, they have 10 days to comment, but at the public meetings themselves, we'll be as soon as the public meetings end, we'll be compiling all of that data, and we will speed it up by actually having our sit down and narrowing them down as much as we can. I don't know, by May 15th, that's putting us, if we get comments kind of up until the last minute, but it's possible. We can shoot to try to do that.
They have to work nights.
I already work nights.
Well, Carol, with that in mind, if you indicated that right now it could be narrowed to 3 because the data has already been gathered and it's already been analyzed, but we have to go through the public involvement process of the public meetings. Why would the meetings be so late in April? Why not move them more forward?
Well,
To President Berthelot's comment.
I mean, well, it's a lot of work that we have to, get the public notice. We've just gotten some of this data in, and we're QCing it and making sure it was good to go even for today. So this is kind of brand new, finishing up the traffic studies and the toll estimates and making sure everything was good to go. And then, it's a process trying to get these public meetings secured and set up. And so that's just when we settled on. Actually, we tried. We looked at earlier April, but we have Easter holidays. We don't want to try to schedule public meetings around holidays or when school's out, spring break. You want to make sure you have it to where you get as much public participation as you can. So it's basically Easter falls right smack in the middle of April. So we pushed it to the end of April to try to accommodate everybody.
Any other questions?
Quick
Mr.
question.
Diaz.
So as you go through and y'all start deciding which ones y'all gonna narrow down, how do you go about scoring them? Because I see when you look at the average daily traffic counts, a low score is 22,000 cars and a high score is 24,000 cars. 2,000 car difference. I don't know how important that is. I mean, that's about the number of cars we have passed across the ought to been built somewhere else bridge. So it's not a big number. But then from the most expensive bridge to the cheapest bridge, you're looking at 300 million. So I guess as a detriment to, or I guess, scoring this thing is which bridge is most likely to happen. How do y'all look at across all these different variables? What's important, what's not?
I mean, they're all pretty evenly weighted. When we do it, we're going to have to, put our heads together and talk about exactly what you just said. Is it just traffic? No, it's not just traffic. Is it just cost? If it were a perfect world, which one would we care about the most? But I mean, we're just going to have to get together and rank them. And then, the public is where kind of the wild card that comes in, because every public comment does matter. What the parishes, have expressed to us, that absolutely does matter. So, once we add that public comment, then we'll have to go about making those decisions on which one gets prioritized over the other.
Okay, one other question too. So
Sure.
in deciding which bridge location we're going to pick, at no point are we going to look at the cost for us to get from I-10 on the West Bank to the point where this bridge begins to cross the river, and then from wherever it lands on Highway 30 back to I-10 or wherever we plan on getting these. I mean, at some point, in my mind, to make the best decision on which bridge we should pick, we got to look at the full cost of making this bridge functional. And a bridge connecting LA1 to Highway 30 is not fully functional from the standpoint of what our goals and objective are.
Right.
This is supposed to be a regional solution. So I'm just curious, at any point, are we going to look at those costs before we make a decision?
I'll let Secretary Wilson.
Do you yield to the Secretary? Secretary Wilson?
That's so nice of you. So, Mr. Diaz, I will tell you, we do factor that in, and will factor that in. One of the most key and critical factors is where that crossing will be. You can look at them and see if we were being driven just by the cost of the project for those widenings, you probably would be at a different location, ideally, that you could cross as close to I-10 and as close to I-10 on both sides. That's just not feasible. And so once you narrow the points where this will be, we will be in a better position to start to calculate those costs to get from I-10 to I-10 in those two different approaches as you get to 30 and LA1. And you may have heard me say before, when I looked at this project, we're looking at the total value of the project and not just the crossing itself. This evaluation, this environmental process is looking at the crossing itself. And once that gets to a point that we have a level of confidence, there's a risk associated with studying each of those and a cost with studying each of those at this early stage. So the strategy has always been to narrow the location of the bridge. And once that has been identified, to then proceed to look at the total cost of the entire corridor from 10 to 10.
I will add that, you know, in several of our traffic modeling, we did include improvements to LA30, like as 4-lane, as well as other long-range transportation plan improvements in our traffic modeling numbers. So those guys were considered. And part of what we're going to start as soon as we get into part 2 of the contract, we're going to start with the environmental documentation. We're going to actually start with the VISM traffic modeling, which will identify more of the network, you know, type of improvements that would need to be made on LA30 and LA1 at the 3 alternatives that go through into NEPA. It was considered in our traffic modeling. Cutting me off.
Mr. Rayford?
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Don't worry about it. There we go. First off, I do appreciate all the information that we have in regards to the overall plan. I do have some concerns, which I've expressed to y'all as a group. In general, I think, number one, public comment to me is very, very important. You know, it decides sometimes what can and cannot happen. It may not always be the way we want, but I think public comment is essential in deciding how we want to move forward. And, you know, while I don't disagree with the chairman's comment, if we could push it up, that would be certainly advantageous to everybody. But, you know, I would not even want to look at not having those public meetings, because I think they're the ones, the public who lives in and around these areas where these locations are going to be tied into, could be impacted. And I think we want to hear what their issues are and try to address them as clearly and as responsible as we're supposed to. Number two, my concern of the locations is where on the 2 in East Baton Rouge Parish, I certainly have concerns about using our roadways as a corridor to get it to the interstate. And both of these roadways that we have made reference to are EBR parish roads. And certainly, while that may be in the bigger picture, nobody's explained that bigger picture to me yet. And I think that's kind of important to see where we are going to be, including LA30, which part of that is going to be City of Baton Rouge and part is going to be DOTDs. We work very well together, and I don't have a problem with that, but there's a lot of unanswered questions that I've been asked to make decisions on which one of these locations, but I don't want to be having people drop off the bridge, come on LA30, and be using, you know, Bluebonnet as an exit to go to Interstate 10. That is not, I have enough traffic problems already on my parish. Now, doesn't mean that it can't be resolved in other ways for some improvements, and I think that's really what I'm going to want to have, what those improvements are going to be, so we can at least give the motoring public a reasonable response as to how we're going to address that. You know, there's no question we need another bridge. I don't want anybody to think that, well, we don't want it. We do need another bridge. Where that location is depends on what all the other improvements that may go along besides this crossing, and where that needs to go certainly could be a plus or be a minus from anybody's standpoint. So I just wanted to get my point across, and again, I don't want anybody to say, oh, East Baton Rouge Parish doesn't want the bridge. No, I just want the public to have their input. I think that's imperative. That's who we answer to. And to me, that's what I want to hear from them before we move forward,
Right.
regardless of the situation.
And
Thank
you know,
you.
I think I've told most of you, but if I were not so intimately tied to the project, I would absolutely be going to the public meeting myself. As a private resident, I can see the intersection of Bluebonnet and LA 30 from the front of my neighborhood. So I'm absolutely going to be impacted maybe by a few of these alternatives that if they make it through. But, I'm getting stopped in my neighborhood even by my neighbors asking what's going on. So I too am, nervous, but I understand that we need to, fix it. So, I'm curious myself to see where this thing ends up.
Kara, I want to thank you and your team meeting them last week. Your due diligence, the team experts that you had brought in here. We should have got a hold of river pilots long time ago. A shout out to them. I mean, they knocked it down from 20 to 10 to y'all real quick. We should have had them a long time ago. So we down to 10. Fred, thank you for those nice comments. Look like East Baton. Bring that bridge at East Baton Rouge. He says over here the traffic, and I understand about the due process that on the public hearings. You know, this country was built by giving up property and everything else, and I believe that the due process needs to happen with the public hearings for the residents, for the 10 locations, and President Berthelot is concerned about the $500 million that our governor put into this budget, and we are worried about something that we really don't have any control of. Is that correct, Senator Ward? To the fact, okay. So, I'm aware about what I have control of. I want to again thank your team for your openness at my office the other day, and look forward to seeing you May the 3rd, and then the decision will be made on the last 3, correct?
Yes, sir.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I'd like to go back to the public meetings just for a second before I make some comments on Mr. Rayford's comments as well as the secretary's. There's the week of April the 18th through April the 21st that was skipped for these meetings, and I realize Easter is on the 17th. So there's 4 days in there. At least the May 2nd and the May 3rd meeting could be pushed into that just to be sure that we get this information and the 3 sites identified at the earliest possible date. I'm just concerned that given the commentary that has been made by some others, not in this room necessarily, about the dedication of dollars for a site that is unknown, when in truth, in fact, we do have that information readily available now, but we're following a process that is indicated that we must have, which I fully support and endorse. So with that said, if we could move the May 2nd and May 3rd meetings forward to either the 18th, 19th, 20th, and 21st, I think it would be well advised to do such.
I think that that week was originally skipped because it's spring break for certain schools, and but we can. I'll get with our public involvement team is here, so we can talk about it certainly. See what we can
I would
do.
just appreciate that consideration. That gives you a whole nother week to be prepared to do this, and we can call a special meeting if we have to do that to ensure that this gets out into the public. I'd like to make a comment about some of the comments that were made here. This district was put together by legislation. Now, Senator Ward, 3 years ago, if I recall, a little over 3 years ago. And it was composed of the 5 parish presidents, a secretary of DOTD, and a governor appointee. I'm the governor's appointee. And the public has been interested in having improvements in infrastructure in this region for decades. For decades, there's been talk about loops, about bridges, about diversion of traffic or whatever, and it has always boiled down to not in my backyard. And it would be very easy for us here to be premature and state that we're not going to have this in my backyard and I'll fight to the death. And yet, for the general public good, it is critically important that we be very objective and somewhat clinical about this. This is the future for this region is very dependent upon getting a bridge in this area. And I think it is very important that we continue to follow the process and yet face the reality that hopefully we're going to have a bridge, we will have it funded, and we'll get through this, and it will be built. And I promised President Urso that once it's built, I'm driving over to pick him up and bringing back over the bridge, because we're about the same age and we want to be sure that we enjoy it.
I'll pick you all up. How about that? And we'll all go.
But quite candidly, I want to be sure that the expectations are real out there, that this bridge is critically important to this region, not just East Baton Rouge Parish or West Baton Rouge or Iberville or Ascension or even Livingston. Those people who live on our infrastructure here knows the limitation that it has, and particularly the underdevelopment that it has. And I think DOTD has done a very good job of trying to prioritize the current jobs that are funded so that they can get done in this particular region. And now we have the opportunity to get the funding needed to at least jumpstart this process, and I think it is critically important that we take advantage of that and ensure that we get this narrowed to a site and embrace it and go forward with it. So I would like to make those comments to you today, that we don't get too provincial or proprietary in our approach to analyzing this situation, that we look at the region and what's going to be best for it. Do we have any other questions for Kara today? You haven't been grilled tough. This has been pretty easy.
It was. Well, fortunately for me, I met with all of you ahead of time, so... And as in regards to the public meeting and pushing it up, I know, for NEPA type deadlines, I think we have to have the public notice published at least 2 weeks ahead of time. So we'll talk about it and see what we can do to accommodate that.
Well, you know the process and you know the rules we have to follow, and we don't want to violate any rules or procedure or regulations, but the sooner the better, I think, the getting this accomplished.
Mr. Chairman, I want to make one other statement too, because it is important about this new bridge location. But number one, I hope the legislature understands the importance of having the funding in place to be able to make this happen. This bridge didn't happen overnight, but for one thing for sure, what we got out there is not working. It doesn't work, and it hasn't worked for a long time. I think this is the right way to do it. If you look at some of the other major cities, they have multiple bridge locations, multiple crossings over rivers that they need in their parish or within a general vicinity. I know that the legislature's got to do what they need to do, but we need the funding to be able to move this project forward. I think we're closer than we've ever been in regards to looking at a site and trying to make this thing happen as quickly as possible. Certainly we have to meet the federal rules and guidelines. Nobody knows that probably better than Sean, but I have to deal with it every day too. And when people ask me, why does it take so long? Normally it's all the rules and the regulations that you have to comply with. And if you don't, you lose that funding. And that's not a good message to send back to the public either. But I just wanted to emphasize by how important, and hopefully that we can get the legislative group to say, let's move forward this $500 million, because it is critical to making this thing happen for us, regardless of where it goes. Regardless, it is critical. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
President Berthelot?
Just one final comment, Mr. Chairman. I do stand corrected that the session ends on June the 6th instead of the 15th. Perhaps my conversation with my legislator, he said we need to have something done by May 15th. And so I stand corrected on that.
Okay. Well, we'll still look at it and see what we can do to speed them up a little bit.
If no one else has any further questions for Kara, we can dismiss you at this time. So thank you very much for the preparation. The materials that were provided was very, very helpful and very thorough. The next item on our agenda is to invite Mr. Jamie Seitz, who's with the Capital Region Planning Commission, CRPC. And a lot of people may not know too much about this organization and what it does, but it is the official metropolitan planning organization for this region, and that does have significance as it relates to the federal government and funding. So I'd ask Mr. Seitz to come here and introduce his organization to us, but also to the public who might be listening today, and explain what CRPC is and what role they play in some major infrastructure program like we are in the midst of considering. Mr. Seitz?
Hey, good afternoon, Mr. Campbell, and thank you all commissioners. My name is Jamie Setz, and I am with the Capital Region Planning Commission here in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. And I've been working here as executive director almost 9 years. And so the history of the CRPC and how we work on this new bridge, I'm going to kind of go over a little bit of the brief history of where we have been the last few years and then what some of the steps that we're going to take going forward. So the first time we started getting involved in this project, and just to be clear, if federal funds come to the Baton Rouge area, they come through the MPO because we are a non-attainment for the Clean Air Act. And so we have to do things, extra studies to make sure that we're eligible for federal funds. So about 8 years ago, DOTD came to CRPC and asked for some modeling work on a new bridge location. And in short order, we returned to DOTD and said, under the current long-range plan in the Baton Rouge area, there is no plans to widen LA 30. And it doesn't really matter where you put a bridge, because if LA 30 is 2 lanes, you can't get to it. So that was the impetus 4 years ago for the Move 2042 plan that the consultant mentioned. We made LA 30 a 4-lane highway in that, so that you could actually get people to and from the bridge. At that time, the MPO, the elected officials of this area, chose LA 30 widening, the environmental, as the first regional project that crossed parish boundaries. Before, federal funding had gone only to parishes. And so we went forward with that. Now, DOTD is currently negotiating with the consultants on that project, and it should start soon. So that has been the long-term kind of history of where we came from. Now, where are we going in the near future? We're going to be applying to the U.S. DOT. They have, in the bipartisan infrastructure law, certain funds that you can apply for. It's called the InfraGrant program. The InfraGrant program will be $3.2 billion for the nation. So if you think about nationwide, there will be about 32 projects of about $100 million each. Current right-of-way estimates on the 20-mile corridor are about $100 million. So we will be applying for right-of-way funds from the U.S. Department of Transportation. And we're going to be doing this even though the environmental has not been completed. And so this is probably one of the wrinkles that will be in this situation, is normally you have to have an environmental completed before you ask for the money. There have been a handful of instances where right-of-way has been authorized before the completion of the environmental, and those are normally in places like where you have a mountain, or you have a coastline next to a naval base, or maybe you have a big river and a railroad that you just can't move. And so our application as we move forward will be focused on acquiring the right-of-way for LA 30. I'm very concerned about this because, as Mr. Rayford knows, right-of-way costs in the Baton Rouge area are much higher now than what we estimated 2 years ago. And so I think that the best thing we can do is get the right-of-way acquired even before the environmental, because if we wait for 3 years, we might not be able to afford the right-of-way costs. So that is what we're going to be doing in CRPC in the near future. We will continue to work with Parish President Berthelot on the LA 415, LA 1 connector. That was the last application we did. And the reason I kind of wanted to mention the $3.2 billion and how much that would buy the nation is in the fiscal year 17-18, Parish President Berthelot had come to CRPC and asked for an application for the infra program for the LA 415, LA 1 connector. Unfortunately, that year the state put in 2 applications, and so our application was not accepted. So we need to make sure as we go forward with our applications this year, that there's only one state application. And so I want to make that clear that, you know, we want to move forward on this project. We've been trying to move it forward for 4 years, but we need to get some money to get the right of way before the cost becomes, uses up the entire construction estimate. And just for reference, in 2013, when the stage 0 was completed by DOTD, they had an estimated construction cost of 20-mile project, $220 million. We didn't even have a right-of-way cost. I was just estimating $3 million. But if they're coming in north of $5 million, we're going to have an issue. So we really need the $100 million right away for the right-of-way. And with that, I will entertain any questions from y'all at this time.
So if we were speaking with legislators right now, the funding that they're discussing for the bridge, would that be applicable to the right-of-way discussion for the connectors?
Only if you can get the U.S. government to agree that you can acquire the right-of-way before the completion of the environmental. That's kind of what we need them to pre-approve us on. It's not just the money. We need to be able to spend the money before the environmental's been complete.
Who makes that request?
We are going to do it as CRPC straight to the U.S. DOT, straight to the feds.
So you're in, and
We're going to negotiate that, yes, and hopefully we will get some support from our congressmen and our senators so that they will be able to explain to the other resource agencies. Because what happens is U.S. DOT is one arm of the federal government. They have to go to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife. They have to go to the Corps. They have to go to the EPA. And they need these other resource agencies to agree there are no other feasible alternatives to widening next to the road that's currently there.
any questions for Mr. Pronounce your name again for me.
Sets.
Sets.
Like an
not
old hen,
sites.
sets.
Sets.
Hey, Mr. Diaz, I'm sorry we don't have the right of way, but I'm working on it.
Am I up?
Mr. Diaz, yes.
Yeah, so I just want to make a point about Highway 30 because I don't want to beat a dead horse, but you know, as it stands right now, there's about $10.5 billion worth of expansions already announced. For every $1 billion in expansions, you have about 1,000 construction workers. So we're about to add on Highway 30, on the 8.5 mile portion of that road from I-10 to the Iberville line, probably another 10,000 construction workers, which is about 28 more miles of traffic. So that's probably from the I-10, I-12 split almost to Mandeville. And it's on top of the 6,300 vehicles we had over the last 10 years. So you get to a point to where it's going to almost be a crisis from the standpoint of can we grow any more industrially? And when you look at the economic output and what those chemical plants mean to our general fund, I mean, just the wages on personal income is about 35 million a year to our general fund. So at some point, we can't. I know it's expensive, and it's kind of sometimes why I think we get passed up for rural roads because it's too expensive to purchase our right of way. But and I've said this to when we met with Sean about a month ago, and I'll tell you, is Ascension Parish government is willing to sit down and be very creative on how we fund some of this and go as far as coming into our own pocket. We just need to know what you guys can match, what Sean and them are willing to match. We've talked about the idea of floating a $50-75 million bond. Because at some point, those right-of-ways are not, it's like beachfront property. It's not getting any cheaper. And if we don't get it now, then we just at some point are going to price ourselves out of being able to solve this problem. So
Well,
any creative funding mechanisms that you have, we're all ears.
That's always nice, but it's like you're trying to fix a problem from 30 years ago. So for instance, the right-of-way cost I was referencing that East Baton Rouge just had, it's on Hooper Road. Hooper Road was last widened more than 30 years ago, okay? Hadn't been widened since the late 80s. The right-of-way cost for 3 miles is over $23 million. Okay, that's crazy. I mean, how do we do a 20-mile corridor at $140 million? That was the construction estimate. So that's why our application, I think, is so important to get the right-of-way. Let's acquire the right-of-way and get that done. I think that's critical.
President Berthelot?
I have a question, Mr. Secretary. If the right-of-way cost is going, how does that compare to an elevated roadway? Is that a lot more? I mean, if we got a right-of-way now, is it possible to make a raised elevation? Just a question.
So I mean, anytime you go vertical, you're going to have exponential cost. even if it's on the existing right of way, and you have a cost that's going to be borne by the traveling public, because when you do go elevated, you're impacting that adjacent property in some form or fashion. And so that too requires an environmental process. And in many cases, what we didn't do, as Jamie said 30 years ago, was make the investments that we needed to make to secure right-of-way on these growth corridors that we've known have been growth corridors for years before I sat in this seat, when we didn't have the dollars. And we're in a different position. While we don't have enough money to do everything we want, we certainly got a lot more than we had in 2016 when I came in.
Right.
And so I don't know that that's a feasible alternative to dealing with the right-of-way issues. And again, since I've got the mic, I text this guy. I said that horse would much rather be dead than have him keep beating it, because he talks about this all the time. And I think he's right that there needs to be cooperation and collaboration with locals, no different than what we do with other parishes at this table. The reality is we should have been having this collaboration 20 or 30 years ago, making some of these commitments before it got super, super expensive to do it. And we would love to work with all of our local partners to put in place things that can protect right-of-way, but being a state that values individual rights, that's easier said than done. And so it has to happen with zoning, it has to happen with ordinances, and those are things that we don't control. But we've talked about that, and we're happy to be a part of any innovative solution to addressing these issues. And to bring it back to what we're talking about today, until we know where that bridge is going to be, I can't, as a department, begin the feasibility process to do the due diligence. There are things that Jamie's going to need. Setting the location for this project, for the bridge, is absolutely the key and essential start to being able to have a more informed conversation that could lead to cooperation and collaboration with locals.
Secretary Wilson, with that said, then right now there's still, if we had funding, other aspects of this bridge that could be worked on from specification standpoint, et cetera, with that funding to be dedicated. It's not going to be locked up in some trunk and hidden in grandma's attic.
Well, are you referring to the $500 million, I would assume?
Correct.
So absolutely not. The $500 million as contemplated and proposed by the governor would best position Louisiana to be competitive nationally for discretionary grants that are going to be available, such that they will invest in these mega projects because they know they are much larger than any state ever contemplated for some of these multi-billion-dollar projects. They just don't happen, and they happen with a financial plan. And one thing that was not really driven home when Kara spoke, and she did a phenomenal job, I'm sure Paul will commend you when he sees the video, is for these projects that upwards of $500 million, without having a financial plan that can deliver it, you can't get your record of decision. And so that $500 million would facilitate that process, as well as serve as a carrot to attract additional investment. And if you don't think that's a reality, you have to look no further than the BP bill, where we were given $150 million for the LA1 project, and we turned around and got a grant of $135 million, which in fact was the second largest ever infra grant offered in the country, and today still sits at that point. And so we know historically, when you apply for these discretionary grants, you don't get more than what you put up. You actually get less than what you put up. And so as we look at that $500 million best positions us, I believe, and the governor believes, which is why it's there, best positions us to leverage those dollars to address the entire project and not necessarily just the bridge. It's looking at the entire scope of what we have before us.
Thank you. Any other questions for Mr. Sitz? Thank you very much for coming here.
Thank you, sir.
I'd like to ask Senator Ward to give his some comments. Thank you for being here today.
No, Thank y'all for all the hard work, and thank you, Mr. Chairman. Members, I appreciate the last 3 years of effort and everything that's gone into getting us to this point. I think when you look at projects of this magnitude, it really comes down to two things. Of course, the first one is always money, the financial side of that, and it's really difficult to try and pull all those dollars together. And really, the second most important thing is teamwork and trying to get people from a region to all be on the same page in something as simple as site selection. I know as a legislator, you do the best you can to represent your district first and foremost, and then from there you also look at the statewide impact. And I think for many of you, it's the same thing. Your first priority is the parish you represent, but sometimes you run into things that are a little bit bigger, and you have to not only look at the parish you represent, but you also have to look at the region as a whole and how everything works together. So I really think that we have a good opportunity to get these dollars that are available to us. It's going to take a lot of effort, but I think when session winds down, we'll be in a good place as far as that is concerned. I know I'm certainly not going to speak for the entirety of the delegation, but I really do believe that the vast majority of this delegation, the regional delegation, Baton Rouge regional delegation, is going to work together to try and make that happen. I know I will for sure, and many others that I've spoken with. So I think the number one thing that we need to do collectively is try and form a consensus around where that location is going to be. I know in past years there was more to it than a bridge location. It was discussion of an entire loop. So there were probably a number of reasons why past efforts have failed. But I do know that one of the hang-ups over the years has been the location of the bridge. And for me, I don't want to see us come this far and fail because we can't agree. It might not be the place I'm most happy with, might not be the place that somebody else is the most happy with, but for our region as a whole, I think it is very important that as things are narrowed down, we come to an agreement on that and all get behind it so we can move forward. I know this is over and above all of each of your duties back home in the parish you represent, and certainly Mr. Campbell, I know this is a complete voluntary time for you, and so I really appreciate that. But at the end of it all, I think sooner than later, we're going to all be driving across a bridge, and we will have done something monumental, not just for the region or the parishes that it ends up sitting in, but quite honestly for the entire state, because this is bigger than just a regional project. It's going to have statewide impact on our economy, on the travel of people going from east to west, even coming from the north and headed down to New Orleans or anywhere else south of here. So if there's any questions, I'm happy to try and answer them. But other than that, I appreciate all the hard work that you've all put in up until this point.
Any questions for Senator Ward? Many may not know that Senator Ward authored the bill that created this district and took it forward and got it funded with seed money with DOTD to get the consultants hired and to get funding for the district. So he's been the one that has been the champion of this particular district and this concept, and probably took a lot of heat for doing this. But this is something this region greatly needs, and we've got to stick it out and stick it through and make sure that this gets done for this community, the communities around here, for the quality of life of all the citizens. Thank you, Senator Ward.
Thank you.
We've come to the part in the agenda for public comment, and I do not see any cards here, so I will. Oh, you do? We do.
Yeah, they didn't ask, but I just saw them here, so I filled it out. Does anybody else need a public comment card?
Thank you. Mr. Mayu, you're present and you'd like to speak?
Yes, I am.
All right, great, Mr. Mayu. And I would just caution each of you, this is a comment section. This is not a questionnaire or a interrogation. You to make your public comments. Thank you.
Well, that leaves out a lot. My name is Charles Mayo. I live here in Baton Rouge. And there's just so much going through my head about all this, because it seems that there's a kind of a backward approach to this whole thing. Last night I was using a funnel to pour some sugar into something. And so I decided, I want to try to get it a little bit more rapid, so I got a bigger funnel. But you know what? It's at the same size hole. So you know what happened. Nothing, except it started backing up. So I don't understand this whole rush to try to widen the interstate, knock down the bridges and all that stuff. Well, you don't have a bridge. I mean, you're still going to have an impasse when you try to go over that bridge. So it just seems to me that it ought to be focusing on, the bridge, and let all this other stuff that y'all are going to, man, the impact. Have y'all talked about or looked at the social impact and the economic impact that you're going to have from trying to demolish the bridges and widen these things? It flabbergasts me, gentlemen. I don't understand, but I guess y'all have some.
Are you talking about the widening of the interstate?
I am.
Right.
Yeah, to me that they're interconnected with the bridge.
They might be interconnected, but we have nothing to do with that.
Okay, well, do you know who I could go to and talk to?
That was a decision made, I believe, by the Department of Transportation and Development.
Well, then he's here, huh?
That's right.
Yeah, I mean, I'm in the right place, it looks like to me.
This is the Capital Area Road and Bridge District, and we were created to have a bridge built between, on the west side, Highway 1, and on the east side, Highway 30. The widening of Interstate 10 is a totally different project, totally different funding, totally different decisions were made.
Well, then y'all ought to get yourselves together. I mean, my goodness, it's to have those two as two disparate kinds of ways of dealing with this issue. I mean, if you're talking about regional, I think, and if we're going to go regional, then you got to put those two together. But anyway, Dr. Wilson, if there's a chance that I could meet with your committee at some point, let me know when.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I will just say, Mr. Mayo, we've had extensive public engagement and public comment on the bridge project that you referred to here today, but we've done the same thing with regards to the I-10 widening. And I would just suggest to you that we look at infrastructure from two different perspectives. In some cases, there's a need for capacity, meaning new and improved routes for people to move safely and effectively and efficiently. But we also have a huge asset management responsibility to take care of what's already built. And the truth is, what's already built is at the end of its useful life. And we have a responsibility at the state to take care of that infrastructure. And we have discussed and debated and have had lots of public engagement, very similar to what this process is, following the NEPA guidelines. That project has been approved, and it's actually under contract, and it is moving forward. And the reality is that was advanced simultaneously with managing not just this project that we discussed at CARB-D, but the other thousands of projects across the state of Louisiana. And when you look at this Baton Rouge region, you absolutely need both of them. We've never shied away from that, and a part of our statewide transportation master plan suggested that. If you just built the bridge, you would not have the relief that you need on I-10 without adding additional capacity in that position, as well as dealing with the maintenance obligations that are going to be competing for dollars as we have controlled our own destiny instead of having our destiny control us. And so I appreciate your comment and concerns. But I think the decision has been made, and we have an obligation to deliver what we see as a major problem for the state, regardless of the success and the speed at which we can deliver this bridge. We are going to approach this bridge with the same energy and effort and innovation and allocations that we have available to us.
Well, okay, so another question I have. Does the Coast Guard have to approve wherever the bridge is going to go?
They are,
and so
I
you
can
got
answer that, Mr. Chairman, if you don't mind, and I try not to belabor the issue and extend the meeting that Senator Ward passed the bill to have us all here. The Coast Guard is one of the regulatory agencies that are going to have a voice and a permitting role in any of the locations that are selected, along with the Corps of Engineers and their other entities in that process as well.
Is it correct that they've sort of approved only 5 alternatives at this point?
It is correct that the locations that you see in this process are consistent with the environmental process that adheres to what the Coast Guard is acknowledging. I will not suggest to you that we know every decision that they're going to make, but we also pursue those decisions at risk, knowing what that process is. And so a lot of those previous studies that folks talked about that said we didn't need actually informed this process with regards to the locations.
Ooh, that's a whole lot of words to explain what it.
I'm not in the Coast Guard, so I can't speak for them,
okay.
and the NEPA process is not complete, so I dare not put words in their mouths, but I will bet $1 to a dime that the locations of this bridge that we have narrowed are going to be within the scope of what will be approved, and not in the locations where the Coast Guard has said that they will not approve the bridge structure. As you heard Kara say, a great deal of time was paid to the pilots and the maritime industry to understand the mechanics of the river, and that's their obligation.
Are y'all familiar with the road that parallels the river on the west side? When you go over the Sunshine Bridge, you go over the railroad tracks, and that's a road, parallels. That road looks like it's been prepared in a lot of places to be 4-laned. And again, I'm sure there are complications, but if you take Highway 415 and run it along the west bank, then you can tie into the Sunshine Bridge, you can tie into the Luling Bridge, you can tie into the 310 Bridge, and so forth. Anyway, I thank y'all for putting up with me for a little bit.
Thank you, sir. Ms. Landry?
Hello again. I was here at your December meeting. I've been following a lot of groups on social media that are tracking this thing, and a member of the Federation of Greater Baton Rouge Civic Associations made a comment that a holistic plan to tie both ends of these proposed solutions or routes back to I-10 needs to be looked at holistically, which has been discussed, instead of separate pieces and separate committees and separate whatever. Because if we don't do it holistically or regionally or collectively, we may end up with, a nowhere to nowhere bridge. I mean, kind of think Sunshine Bridge, okay? Apparently we didn't do so great of a study figuring out the usefulness of using that money. Anyway, the concern is that I actually wrote a statement because last time I was told I couldn't ask questions. So I'd just like to read the statement if it's okay. Chairman? Okay. And this does tie to the bridge, okay? Even though it is about the I-10 widening project, which we have grave concern about. Capital area business owners and residents and the East Baton Rouge Small Business Chamber of Commerce believe the DOTD's already in motion I-10 widening plan will create years of chaos and negatively impact our local economy and the quality of life of our citizens' lives on many, many levels, including getting back and forth from LSU athletic events. We strongly oppose the DOTD's current, which had started out at less than $1 billion, and latest reports say it's now up to $1.2 billion, even though the DOTD's website or the Franklin Associates website, which is part of the Huval subcontract, has not been updated to include current documents. All of the documents that Franklin, who has close to a $1 million contract to update the citizens, the contracts and the documents that are there are drafts. And some of them go back to 2018. I have requested that Franklin get with DOTD and make sure that the most current documents are up there as part of their consulting contract. We strongly oppose DOTD's current plan through the heart of Baton Rouge. DOTD at the start of this net project announcement was provided with our alternative, less disruptive, less costly plan when this project was announced. According to documents and confirmation from Wes Bollinger, who is the U.S. Department of Transportation Division Administrator for Louisiana, only 2 of the 4 proposals submitted by East Baton Rouge entities were included in the federal review. Now, the federal review process states that all possible solutions proposals must be reviewed by DOTD.
Ms. Landry,
I'm going to finish up. I'm almost finished, sir. Our alternative I-10 widening plan saves approximately $1 billion in construction costs. We are advocating that the savings implemented from changing or adjusting the cost of the I-10 widening plan can be used towards the new bridge project. Here are our specific requests to the Road and Bridge District. The Capital Area Road and Bridge District meet as soon as possible with the House and Senate Transportation Committees and LODT to discuss halting further phases of the I-10 widening plan until a new bridge location is determined. We are requesting that LODT, Louisiana Transportation, conduct an economic impact study on the impact of the current I-10 widening plan for the construction timeline. We are requesting that this district request from DOTD, as it relates to your decisioning on where the bridge will go, the following documents or studies. We would like you to ask DOTD, what is the impact of the widening plan and the new bridge as it relates to the interstate as a hurricane evacuation route? We are requesting that this district get from DOTD some information on the impact of the widening plan and the new bridge as it relates to I-10 as a federal defense highway. We have requested a hearing with the House Transportation Committee to discuss these matters. We are waiting for a response from Committee Chair Mark Wright. Thank you for your thoughtful consideration of our requests.
thank you, Ms. Landry. Is there any further public comment from anyone? Yes, ma'am.
On the agenda, it said you were going to discuss the amount of money that had been spent on the Atlas contract.
Yes.
It was an agenda item. I didn't hear that.
Yes, it was on there. We have spent,
That's that?
yes, it was, I can give you the exact figures. We have spent 61%, but completed 84% of the work.
And what was the dollar amount?
I didn't have the dollar amount. It's 61% of what has been dispensed of the corpus that we were given by the legislature.
Do
3 years
any
ago.
of the district members know the total amount of money that was given from the coffers for Atlas's contract?
Yes, we do.
Okay, and what is that?
$5 million.
$5 million. And you've spent 61% of $5 million.
That is correct.
Wow. Thank you.
But we've completed 84% of the work. There was no further comment, public comment. I'd like to close our meeting with, I guess, some personal reflections on this situation, that because I hear a lot of stuff from a lot of people as well about the bridge, and they want to know when it's going to happen, and I tell them next week so that they can get prepared to drive over it. But quite candidly, I've been in the East Baton Rouge Parish for over 50 years. And I grew up in North Louisiana in a parish called Caddo, where Shreveport is located. And if you've ever been to Shreveport in the last 20 years or 30 years, you will see an easy access to get west or east, east or west, north or south. Because people said, we're going to do it, we're going to make it happen, well, we will sacrifice accordingly, but we're going to make it happen. And they've been living the dream of that, going east, west, north or south in minutes. Minutes. They went across the river. They went across a lake, which was the water supply for that region. They didn't let it stop them. And the reason is that city has flourished because of that infrastructure change of mindset. And I would hope that here in this region, we have something similar. I have nothing to do with and know nothing about the process that occurred with the widening decision that was made from 415 to the I-10-12 split. Whether or not it was needed or not, those decisions were made by people who studied it and did appropriate due diligence, that they felt this was in the best interest of this community. And as the Secretary, I think, indicated by his comments, that this is already under contract to move forward. We have elected officials who operate and make the decisions for our state in the legislature, in the House and in the Senate. There's two transportation committees, one in the Senate and there's one in the House. And I would recommend any citizens, if they have the concerns about decisions that are being made, that they meet with their elected officials and talk with them at the Senate level and the House level, and talk with them candidly about it. And those people do have the decision making to begin or stop anything that occurs. Now, granted, if we're in a contractual commitment, I think that's very difficult to do and has obviously some damage considerations if you tried to stop something under contract. Needless to say, I would recommend particularly you, Ms. Landry, and you, Mr. Mayu, if you do have those kind of concerns and the citizens you represent, that you schedule that meeting with members of the legislature and talk with them candidly about it. But this forum is really an improper forum to do that. We're the Capital Area Road and Bridge District. We have a very limited focus on what we are trying to do. Whether we agree with you or not, we can't as a body make any decision that is really going to impact that, whether we agree with you or not. So I would encourage you to do that. I would highly encourage anyone to do that. That's why your elected official is there. It is to be responsive to the needs and the understandings of the people that they represent. So with that said, if there's no further comments from any of the other commissioners here, we will adjourn our meeting, and hopefully we will have an early meeting to get down to the 3 sites and move forward accordingly. Thank you very much in agreeing to the time change as well.